Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and we'll get started. So I'll just drop that slide for a second so you can see our lovely faces. So I'm Tabitha Acton, for those of you that I haven't come across before, and I'm one of the farming advisors in the Farming and Land Use team at the Soil Association. Very lucky to be joined this evening by Kate Still and Phil Stocker Kate from the Soil Association and Phil from the National Sheep Association, who I'm sure you will all be aware of. They are here to help go through kind of the livestock focus parts of all of the schemes that are available at the moment, including the animal health and welfare pathway. So I will start sharing my slides again, but the couple of housekeeping things as we go. You'll find as you've logged on that you've got your mics and cameras switched off. That's just to try and keep everything smooth. We are recording the session, so that will be available afterwards as well. If you have any questions, there's a couple of options for questions. There is a chat function and a Q&A function. Don't mind which one you use. We will try and tackle them as we go through, unless we're starting to run out of time, in which case we'll save some for the end and we'll follow up with any answers that we don't manage to provide today. So I will pop my slides back up so you can see what we're talking about. And yeah, just keep firing questions at us as you get them. So hopefully you can see that first slide again. If you are having technical issues, do pop that in the chat as well. So I weren't able to, oh, sorry, just technical question come up straight away. Often with technical things, standard answer is to log out and log back in again. Very simple. If that's not working, please do try to speak to us and we'll see if we can work something else out, but that does normally help. So the content of this evening, we're going to start with just a little update on where we are at now. Still not as much information as I would like to be able to give to you, but a little bit about SFI and countryside stewardship. I'm going to then hand over to Phil, who's going to talk about the animal health and welfare pathway, and then a few other bits and bobs, as he's a fountain of knowledge. We'll then talk a little bit about stuff specific for livestock farms. So we've got some kind of beef and sheep, some dairy and some poultry kind of focused options and grants. Me and Kate will cover those, and then a little bit about next steps for the programme and if you need any further help. So stewardship and SFI. So we're talking a little bit about the interaction to start with. So obviously there's been lots of iterations of this, and at the start of the year we expected it to be SFI, then there was the kind of more countryside stewardship side of things, and then they originally talked about it as countryside stewardship plus. That's returned to higher tier, but it was kind of covering different levels of complexity, but also environmental value and economic value. Since the summer, though, we got the SFI expanded offer 2024, and this has kind of proven to cover off what was mid-tier for countryside stewardship, plus those SFI options that we had, the 2023 ones. So it's a little bit broader. It's got quite a few actions in. They have put that all into that application process that we had for the SFI 2023, if anybody had looked at that, which remarkably is quite simple, as long as you're not trying to stack with other things, which is always where we found a bit of an issue, but it is easier than applications have been in the past. Then at the top of that still, we've got higher tier. So they've stuck with the phrasing higher tier. So for those that have been doing schemes for a little bit, we've got the old HLS kind of higher tier, the environmental stewardship higher tier, countryside stewardship higher tier, and then now what we're getting called higher tier, but we don't have the detail on yet. So it could be that we've got all the versions of higher tier going at one go, but hopefully they've got a plan for transitioning that. More details to come at some point. But to focus on the kind of things that we've got available at the moment is this SFI expanded offer. So to apply for that, there is the application portal, but at the moment they're just taking expressions of interest. This has been going on since it opened in the summer. which makes it slightly more complicated. But it's just it's quite an easy form, not meant to take very long to complete. And if you're asking for something simple, if your intended application is fairly simple, there's not much to complicate it, then a lot of people are getting the invite to apply the next day. So then it'll take you through that form a couple of slides ago, and a little checklist and stuff, and you can apply as normal. A couple of things to be aware of: that they will check your eligibility for what you've applied for. So do put the things in that you actually know that you can apply for. Something that will come up in that is the land use codes. So if you need to change any land use codes, change them now. It's very easy to do that on the RPA portal now because it doesn't affect your BPS at all. So go on and make sure that they're all correct before you put your expression of interest in, because if they check back and it's not compatible, then they'll see you as a more complicated application. And the other thing is that it doesn't affect any of your current agreements. So don't panic that if you want to change stuff and things, it won't affect your current agreement. But you do need to have kind of thought a bit about your expression of interest before you put it in. Like I say, if it's simple, they will offer you the chance to apply quite quickly. The expanded offer, if you haven't explored it yet, is 102 options, one of which is one that needs to be supported by your Natural England officer, but everything else you can just apply for yourself. So there's some boundary options, there's buffer strips, quite a few good arable and horticultural options, less good grassland and upland options. The uplands particularly feel like they're falling behind a little bit at the moment, but we're expecting to get more options for those in this higher tier that's coming out at some point. There's some soil health options and some water body options. We'll go through the ones later that we feel are really relevant for the different sectors, but it is worth having a look at them. In terms of how your agreement works, if you go into an SFI agreement, it will start the month after you accept it. One of the nice things about SFI is they're paying quarterly. So normally you'll get the first payment within 4 months, but you'll then get it 3 monthly after that. It ends at the end of the month for your longest action. So if you've got 5-year actions in there, some of the like the endorsed grassland one, for example, is 5 years. It'll end after that. So you can have multiple agreements going at the same time. So if your other actions within your agreement are 3 years, you can start a new one on those, even though you've still got kind of older ones going on. What they do require is an annual declaration. So just before the end of each year, you'll have to say that you've done everything that you said you do. You might have to provide evidence and make sure that you've kept up with those actions. Currently, there is no changes to actions allowed, or not in any normal circumstances. And there is also no transferring your agreement in normal circumstances. However, if there's any issues or some extenuating circumstances, then you may be able to change. In terms of evidence, it's basically just keep track of what you've been doing. So we'll talk about it more in detail, but in terms of, like, say, the herbal lay option, you need to take photos, any seed labels and invoices and stuff, and always try and get those linked back to your field numbers or land parcels. So if you've had a contractor in, for example, try and get them to put it on the invoice, the kind of identifier for that field, so that you can link it back. And it could get asked for either at that declaration point or at any point throughout your agreement. So it is something that you need to keep, but it's pretty easy evidence to keep. In terms of penalties, they were very relaxed about this to start with, and it's built up a little bit, I think, with worries that people are going to be doing stuff that they shouldn't be doing, or people may be taking advantage of it. So there is potential for penalties now. So they could ask you to pay some money back, and that's kind of worst case scenario. They might ask you to pay something back, and they also might block you from applying for anything else for a couple of years. So I expect most of you won't consider this, but if anything starts to go wrong, you need to keep in touch with them and make adjustments, rather than just letting it run its course and it not to work at all. So just basically the message is just to keep in touch. I can see, sorry, I can see that there's a question there, a couple of questions there. So I'll just answer that. One of them is, we were invited to apply, we'd expressed interest. We had a question about whether they'd actually be eligible. Oh, a question whether you're actually eligible. If they've asked the question since they've invited you to apply, I would continue with your application, and that will push them to answer. So you should be eligible. And if you've begun your conversion, so I would continue your application. You can apply for the conversion money and stuff without having started your conversion. So you can start that again once you've been given it if you would like. You don't have to be already doing it or anything. So I would continue your application, and that'll push them to get an answer. But obviously you won't get your agreement until they've come to the end of that answer anyway. But if you've been invited to apply, I would just continue you with your application. Hope that helps. Kate, was there other questions that were relevant to the slide?
No, I think we just had a couple of technical issues still. So yeah, you're all good.
Good stuff. I will move on then. So in terms of countryside stewardship, obviously, like I said, the mid-tier has moved into that expanded offer. So there's not a huge amount to say about that at the moment until we get the new stuff out. But what is available is that you can get now countryside stewardship capital grants without being in a countryside stewardship agreement. So if there is capital works that you want to do, and basically we'll mention more grants later, but it is very limited if you haven't already applied for stuff. So if there's any capital works that you want to do, then through these countryside stewardship capital grants is the way to do it. So it covers things like boundaries and trees, there's water quality options, air quality, and there's a lot of flood management options within that capital grants. So that's the place to look. So look at it as an opportunity to set yourself up to prepare for anything that comes later. If you need more boundaries in, if you want to protect any water courses, if you've had anything from catchment sensitive farming suggesting that you need to, then there's grants there to help you do that. There's a few other grants that are still on the go, things like feasibility studies, PA1s and PA2s. Unfortunately, one of the things with all of these grants is that you do have to pay the money first, then claim back. So there is obviously cash flow things with that, but you should have both of your payments for your BPS now. So it's probably at a point where you've got a bit of cash to do. And the final thing on countryside stewardship is the higher tier, and we've been told soon. So was soon before the end of the year. We're expecting that we'll get some details after the budget has been announced at the end of the month. So it's still a watch this space on that, but do take advantage of capital grants if you need to get some stuff done. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and hand over to Phil to talk about the animal health and welfare pathway.
Right. Thanks, Tabitha, and thanks very much for inviting me to come and speak here this evening as well. I recognise some names in the list, some old friends that I would have known years ago as well. So no, it's a real pleasure to be here. And as Tabitha said, I'm going to talk in a bit more detail about animal health and welfare pathway. I'm Chief Executive of the National Sheep Association, and most of our time is spent on sheep-related matters. So I am going to focus on sheep pathway, and I do chair the sheep pathway group as well. But I will try and give a little bit of an overview of some of the other sectors, the animal health and welfare pathway for the other sectors as well. Let me just see if I can share my screen and get into presentation mode. Can you tell me, is that up?
Yeah, that's up and working.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. So I guess just to go back as well, and the principle of a lot of the new future farming schemes are based on two approaches, really. The first one is the reward for the delivery of public goods and things like SFI and stewardship, the contribution to the environment and environmental outcomes, I guess, fall very much on the side of a reward for delivering environmental goods. The other aspect of the future farming schemes is very much are incentives to try to encourage greater levels of productivity or efficiency in resource use as well. And the animal health and welfare pathway, I guess, crosses both of those two funding mechanisms or justifications, if you like, in that some of the welfare outcomes I think will continue and do come under this banner of a reward for the delivery of things that are in the public interest or public goods. And other aspects of it, and certainly the health and welfare review and the endemics program, are very much there to try to encourage an investment into things that will improve productivity and efficiency and resource use. And I think it's really important to point out that the animal health and welfare review in particular is planned to last for 3 years until 2027. And then some aspects of this will become part of a legislative requirement. They'll become mandatory. And at that point, of course, the funding to support those activities will come to an end. So some of these things that I'll talk about now will be relatively short term. What we've got to try and do, I think, in the future is to make sure that the government and DEFRA maintain that investment in this whole area of animal health and welfare, when we manage to use that for slightly different things, even if some elements in the future become mandatory. I think it's important. This is such an important area. I'm sure most people would agree that we need to try and keep that budget and steer it in different directions to try and help people to make more of a journey down that pathway, I suppose, of improving animal health and welfare. So the good thing about this program, I think, is that it has very much been designed and driven through a co-design process. It's very much been DEFRA and government and the industry working together to try to identify and develop something that will work. And I hope again, you'd agree that we've made some progress there. It's all driven by the universal delivery of healthier, higher welfare animals across our farms. And again, the aim there is to improve efficiency and productivity, profitability on farms, but also our reputation and our reputation in terms of any new trade deals in the future as well. So I guess it's multi-purpose in terms of what's trying to be achieved through this process, but it is very much a co-design process. Where are we at the moment? Well, we are in a position where we've got the availability of funding to improve animal health and welfare. We start with animal health and welfare review. This covers somewhere in the region between of 2 to 3 hours of vet and farmer time. And it allows you to have bespoke health and welfare advice very much at the start of the process on farm. In some situation, it allows for testing for some key endemic diseases as well. Before, if people choose to, you can move on to the endemics program, and I'll come onto that in a moment. But the other aspects of Pathway are that it does give you access to infrastructure grants, things, and some of these grants aren't available at the moment, but grants such as slurry stores or potentially farrowing crates moving away from farrowing crate systems in the future. And it does give you access as well to small equipment and technology grants as well. And although that funding strand is closed at the moment, there's been some really interesting and quite useful equipment that's been available, even though that does still require the farmer to come up with a percentage of the capital requirements. So the farmers start with the endemics prep with the health and welfare review, and then they go through that process, and they can follow that with an endemic diseases follow-up visit where you can get further advice and testing as well. As I said, the whole program is due to come to an end in 2027, so that should allow for farmers to have 3 review and 3 follow-up visits between now and then. The review process started just over a year ago, and the endemics program was launched in June earlier this year. So this at the moment is offering cattle, pig and sheep farmers funding for that veterinary support. It provides funding for farm visits to reduce endemic diseases and improve conditions, increase productivity and improve animal welfare. I've already said that. Started with the Animal Health and Welfare Review, and it's now been expanded also to include the follow-up, which is the Endemic Disease Programme. The sequence is that farmers register for the advice. They do that through the RPA, the Rural Payments Agency, and then they speak to their vet about coming out and doing that review. They then make the claim, and they do the follow-up visit, and they make the claim for that. There's two phases. You do the review, and you make a claim. You get a reference number, and then you can apply for the endemics program, do that follow-up visit, and make a further claim. The process is that you should always do that review before you do the follow-up endemics program, and they should be linked. And if you've completed an old animal health and welfare review within the last 10 months, you can go straight to your first follow-up. Just to mention as well, there is a linkage here with the requirement that came in at the start of this year, which was for the veterinary attestation number, which most processors will require now if they're selling meat, well, either domestically or because of carcass balance. Most of the processors are involved both in supplying the domestic market and export markets as well. So that veterinary attestation number is required. It can be either delivered as part of the pathway process, or if someone is part of a farmer assurance scheme or an organic scheme, then they should be eligible for that VAN number anyway.
Bill, we've just got a we've just got a question in the chat.
Yes.
So much of animal health depends on correct feeding. This doesn't tend to be the vet's specialism. Will there be access to nutritional advice as well as vet's advice, or is it just the vets?
The intention that this is delivered through what is called a vet-led team. So I think as long as the vet is leading the process, and particularly we get onto the endemics program, farmers could bring additional advice in. And that could come through a nutritionist, but it has to be part of advice or guidance that the vet has given. So if through the farmer and the vet, they decide that there needs to be some more nutritional investigation, then it could, in theory, be used for that purpose as well. But this is very much the whole essence of this program is about trying to improve that advisory relationship, that working relationship between vets and farmers.
Great, thank you.
Okay. The follow-up visit, the endemics visit, needs to be done no more than 10 months after the initial review, and the farmer has to make certain information to provide certain information to make the claim as well. That will include the summary from the vet following the veterinary visit, and in some situations it will also include the laboratory analysis or test results as well. As I say, we should be able to get 3 goes at doing this over the next 3 years. So to look in a little bit more detail at sheep, the eligibility, anyone that's got 21 or more sheep in England, obviously this is an England program, anyone that's got 21 or more sheep is eligible for the program. That's not 21 ewes either. So if someone's got a smaller number of ewes, but after they've lambed and with their ewes and lamb numbers, they exceed that 21, then they will be eligible. But they need to have more than 21 when the vet comes out, when they make the application and when the vet comes out on farm as well. All businesses keeping livestock need a CPH number anyway. They need their flock to be registered with APHA, but to claim for the pathway, they'll need a business number, an SBI number that is linked to that CPH number as well. The payment rates, people are always interested in this, but the payment rates for the Animal Health and Welfare Review are £436. Now, for some small flocks, the whole process will cost less than that, and the farmer will end up with some money in their pocket, if you like. Larger flocks, that will be a contribution to what will be a larger sum if it's a bigger flock and it's a more costly process. The follow-up visit, the endemics program visit, offers or provides £639 for that process. And again, that in some situations that the process that the farmer would go through would cost less than that money. For large flocks, that will end up being a contribution to what is likely to be a larger sum of money. So as far as the animal health and welfare review is concerned, the vet comes out and just does a general conversation with the farmer and does an assessment of the diseases and the conditions, has a conversation about what the productivity levels on the farm might be, you know, what the lambing percentage might be, whether the farmer scans or not, and again what the level of losses may be between scanning and lambing, maybe scanning and selling of lambs as well. So that'll give an indication of where those losses might occur. So the vet and the farmer have got quite a lot of freedom through that process to talk about whatever it is that is bothering the farmer or holding that farm back. The one compulsory thing within the sheep health and welfare pathway is that a wormer treatment check has got to be carried out, and that involves taking, ideally it would be 15, it can be as low as 10, but normally it would be 15 fecal egg samples, or fecal samples, sorry, and posting those off to one of the registered labs. And then the lab will do a fecal egg count. If that count exceeds somewhere in the region of 300 eggs per gram, then the farmer will be encouraged to do a wormer treatment check, and then to submit another sample either 10 or 14 days later, depending on which wormer they use, just to check on the efficacy of that worming process. This is not a worm resistance check or anthelmintic resistance check, because there are a number of things that can go wrong when farmers are worming animals. You know, it could be around calibration of the gun. It could be good because they've got the a resistance problem. There's a number of reasons why worming treatments can fail, but it gives an indication of whether worming treatments are effective or not. So that is the compulsory aspect of the sheep health and welfare pathway. But as I said, the advice can cover issues such as biosecurity or medicine use, any other health and welfare concerns that the vet or farmer might have. Go through that process, you claim the money, you submit the veterinary report, and then following on from that, if you choose to, you can go on to the endemic disease follow-up visit, £639. And again, that will allow the vet to go into more detail with you about, it'll follow on from the initial health and welfare review. And during that review, you might determine that you've got a problem with things such as U condition, and that may well lead to low colostrum level or low levels of prolificacy. It could lead to you thinking that there's a problem with reproductive performance, and there's advice there given on maybe doing fertility checks on rams, or again body condition score in ewes, lamb performance and lamb survival rates. External parasites and growth rates in lambs, lameness as well. That's been identified as a really important subject through this process. So lameness, and the other thing that underpins a lot of those conditions, I guess, is exploration of some of what we call the iceberg diseases, things like Malavizna or Johne's disease or OPA. Border disease, those sorts of things. So the program does allow for there to be some blood testing, some lab-based blood testing on those iceberg diseases. So it's quite a complex process, and as I say, small flocks may well spend less than that £639 for the process. Some may well spend more. In my situation, I went through it I've got a small flock of Shropshire sheep. My health and welfare review cost somewhere, including the wormer treatment check, which would have cost around £80. The whole lot would have cost just less than £300. I chose afterwards to do some blood testing for MIDI and Johne's, and again that whole cost I think came to around about £250. Larger flocks, it will obviously cost more. This is a sheet that just gives some guidance to vets really on what they might do when they're talking to farmers, and what advice they might give to the farmers in question. So it gives them the idea that they could discuss recommendations around medicines used on farms, antibiotic use, maybe talking about vaccination programs as well. And again, guidance on how to store them, how best to use them, and also how best to report their use and record their use as well. So, vets are given this guidance before they go out to visit farmers. So it gives them an idea of the sorts of things that they can talk about. These are some of the things that can be looked at. I've talked about this a little bit already, but in the endemic disease follow-up visit, things like U condition. These are the what we call the syndromes, really. U condition or reproductive performance, lamb performance, neonatal lamb survival, external parasites and lameness. All those things down on the left-hand side, and the types of diseases that can be covered within the package are there in that central column, really. Ionis and MIDI. Exploration into factors behind abortion levels, things that might be affecting lamb performance, such as border disease or liver fluke or worms, any of those sorts of things, really. So a wide range of conditions that can be explored in that endemics disease program. I guess we fought hard to try to make sure within the sheep sector we had that choice, because within our industry there is no one disease or condition, I think, that is holding the whole industry back. With the exception possibly of parasitic gastroenteritis worms, and that's why that was chosen as part of the health and welfare package. So the farmer can have a wide range of, has got a wide range of choice in terms of what they might want to look in most detail. As I said earlier, this is likely to go on for 3 years, or it will go on for 3 years. So if we choose to look at something 1 year, the following year, we can choose to look at another condition and spend that money in other ways if we so choose. As far as cattle are concerned, I'm not going to go into any great detail here, but as far as cattle are concerned, there are different payment rates for beef and dairy: £522 for a beef herd and £372 for dairy. And the focus here, the beef farms have not got the flexibility to do such a wide range of exploration, really. The focus here is on BVD, and there are different payment rates in the endemic program, depending on whether the BV test is positive or negative. As you can see, the dairy program is yet to be launched. We're told that is going to be launched soon. The other thing to point out is that it will make sense in due course that a vet can do both a sheep animal health and welfare review and a beef, for instance, health and welfare review at the same time in the same visit. At the moment, that option isn't available to us. That will make a lot of economic sense and efficiency sense once we get to that point. But at the moment, that's not yet available. As far as pigs are concerned as well, eligibility is 51 or more pigs in England. And again, the same conditions in terms of there needing to be an SPI and a CPH number. The payment rates there, £557 for health and welfare review and £923 for an endemic disease follow-up. And the focus here in the pig industry is for PRSS. Let me get that right. My phone's ringing too. PRRS, porcine reproductive and respiratory syndrome. That has been identified as a key thing that's holding the sector back, and that's where the focus is, really. So that's pigs. There's a lot more guidance on gov.uk, and there's a QR code that people can scan to get more details. Increasingly, I think vets are really aware now of this program and are trying to encourage farmers to engage with it. So to speak to your vet isn't a bad place to start as well. But again, there's plenty of information on the gov.uk website, and also links through to direct application to the application processes as well. So do take a look on gov.uk. While I'm talking as well, I just want to highlight a new report that we launched at the sheep event back at the end of July, which has got a very close relationship to health and welfare on farms. And everyone is talking about sustainability at the moment, and I felt it was really important for us to have a conversation about sheep farming and what's going on within this the world of sustainability. So we worked on this report and launched this report back in the middle of July. We make the case that if we're looking at sustainability, we've got to look at it through the widest possible lens. And it's so easy, isn't it, to look at the metric of the day, if you like, whether that's methane or carbon footprints. But, I think probably most people here would agree that there's a much wider range of things that we need to consider when we're looking at sustainability, such as feeding people, our resource use, animal welfare and resilience, and ethics behind animal farming as well, the use of natural resources, landscape management, nature, society and economies, rural economies, the impact on the wider environment. They go well beyond the farm boundaries. All of those things, I think, should be considered and looked at when we look at sustainability on farms. I do believe that as far as farming is concerned, we start with some very positive attributes. The trends in sheep carbon footprints over the last 10 years is fairly positive, and we compare fairly favourably when you look at our carbon footprints with Australia and New Zealand, and certainly other countries, the US and Asia as well. I think there's increasing recognition that the role of UK grasslands here really contribute a lot to the delivery of public goods in terms of their ability to store water or to filter water, storing carbon, of course, and supporting nature in many ways as well. So, there's a lot of benefits from those grasslands. We're a multifunctional sector that produces food and fibre. And it delivers a lot of other land use outcomes at the same time, with trees and hedges and woodlands, and if we get it right, species-rich pasture and the like. We've got strong health and welfare credentials. There's a long way we can go to improve that as well, but we've got a good reputation in terms of health and welfare. And certainly in our more remote and fragile rural regions, we do a lot to contribute to the rural economy and to support communities and that infrastructure as well. And again, increasingly, there's a recognition that we're producing a very high quality protein largely from grass and fibre as well. We have a really strong focus in this report on sheep health and welfare, because I think it is one of the ways that we can really improve our productivity and reduce our carbon footprints. It's just a win-win situation if we can improve our health and improve the welfare of our stock. It is the main justification for the animal health and welfare pathway, and it's why we and a lot of other organisations have worked for a long time to try to establish those stronger advisory connections between farmers and vets. Modern Research Institute that we do a lot of work with suggests that improving sheep health and welfare could reduce methane emissions by some 10% through improving our daily live weight gain, improving our feed conversion efficiency, and reducing that involuntary culling that could be through mastitis or an inability to hold body condition, and of course reduce mortality. There's nothing worse for carbon footprints than keeping a sheep all year and then just before it's due to lamb, it dying or aborting. So reducing those sorts of incidents is really, really important. And all of these ambitions link closely to health, whether it's parasite control or metabolic profiles, good colostrum, good quality colostrum, fertility, mastitis, abortions, all those sorts of things as well, with lots of holistic outcome benefits. And I've used this slide before, but to me, all of this is really, really important for everything we deliver on sheep farms and grassland-based farms, whether it's species diversity, whether it's animal welfare, whether it's the product we produce at the end of the day. This isn't what I always eat. Actually, if you see, that's a loaf of bread on the left-hand side and a lovely joint of rolled loin there, and a wine glass at the back as well. But of course, the other things and features that we might be considering on our farms, whether that's getting involved with agroforestry or hedgerow management, all of this is important to our image and to the outputs of what we're involved in. And I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Phil. And that's a balanced diet, is it not? A carb, a protein, and a vegetable in terms of
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
There's not a vegetable in sight, but that's not the way my diet is.
There's grapes. There's grapes. That's vitamins. Great, thank you. We do have a question about the uptake of the animal health and welfare reviews.
So to date, there's been around about 8,000 agreements. So I would still say it's slow. It's interesting. It is only earlier this year, this summer, that the pathway is open to non-BPS eligible farmers. So there's a completely new audience there that I think they'll be quite keen to engage with Pathway. It does take a little bit of doing establishing that relationship with a rural payment agency if you've not had that. But my experience is that they've been quite helpful through that process. So there's still a long way to go. And it's really worth bearing in mind the fact that really every livestock farmer now needs a veterinary attestation number. And this is a way, if you're not farm assured, this is a way of getting the costs of that veterinary attestation number covered as well.
The follow-up question was that 8,000 sheep farmers or 8,000 farmers overall?
That's 8,000 overall.
Overall, there you go. Yeah. I hope that helps, Judith. I think that's a really good point, actually, that it's slides that I've previously included and haven't included today is on eligibility of all of these things. Is that previously there was a 5 hectare limit, and it also was against new entrants and stuff, because basically if you hadn't already been set up with the RPA, they didn't have the capacity to set you up, which is something that also changed this summer when they brought out that expanded offer. So there's quite a lot of people. Well, there was the odd case where if the farm before had done their lump sum exit scheme, that they also had problems getting into stuff. But I think all of that's been worked out now as well. Another question before we move on: does the government pay out at all on being organic? I don't know if that's a question specifically for you, Phil, or maybe for me.
Well, there's no organic element within Pathway, I guess. The organic element is within the SFI options, isn't it? So there's nothing specific organically.
Yeah, so the Pathway you can do either way. It doesn't impact it whether you're organic or not. I suppose it's just obviously you will hopefully have a vet that is up to date with your system.
Yeah.
And in terms of government in general, the payments there is organic options available throughout the within the SFI, or what was they were the mid-tier countryside stewardship ones, and they're now within that expanded offer. So there is
just
options
to
there
as well, Tabitha. But then just looking at some of these questions, it is interesting because, again, most people in this audience, I think, would absolutely agree that we need to be looking at these things holistically. And there's some really good connections that can be made between SFI and Pathway. And a good example there is hedgerow management, isn't it, in terms of the provision of shade? There's nothing within the Pathway, for instance, around providing shade. But if we get vets really bought into this whole process, then they can start to give a little bit of advice and guidance on a wider range of programs that farmers might engage with to improve the wider welfare and productivity of the stock on their farms too.
I think that's very true as well, isn't it, with the SAM3 herbal lays option, because the potential benefits for that from nutrition, from worm control and fermentic properties, are really very strong, aren't they? So
it's very much the angle that we've tried to go for in terms of our advice in terms of the DEFRA Future Farm Resilience stuff as well. So it's very much been about that practical on-farm application and how it all links up with your system. So if anybody does have any specific questions about their system and stuff, do follow up with us, because that's kind of where we've targeted rather than how some of the other organisations have delivered. Another question, I think. It's a shame there's not a mix and match on the Pathway. You could have 10 cows, 20 sheep and 50 pigs and still not qualify. Kind of a question.
Yeah, well, it's true at the moment. That is a disappointment, isn't it, really? I mean, if you take the total of livestock there, it's really quite significant. But if it falls just below the thresholds for each species, then that's quite right.
You mentioned that they were going to be able to do the, say, cattle and sheep one at the same time in future, which sounds like very positive, something that's almost mad that they hadn't done already, but positive that they recognise that. Is that still so that's still the same kind of cutoff for that species, but just they can do it together?
It would be, but at least the vet will be able to come out and do two in one go. And a lot of the conversation around things like maybe biosecurity, for instance,
it's the same conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just a note on the policy stuff. He said he was here as a client rather than a member of staff, but we do have our farming and land use policy bod on the call, so he'll be able to see all these questions and stuff as well, and has regular contact with DEFRA. So do keep popping them on, and Adrian will be making notes of them for the next time he's meeting up with DEFRA. Next question, in relation to animal health and welfare pathway, will there be rewards in the future for farmers with a high welfare standard, low mortalities, vaccinating sheep for multiple diseases, etc.?
That's a challenging question, really. So the intention is that there will be a welfare outcomes payment developed in the future. I have to say it's been really, really difficult within the sheep sector. In a way, it's been easier when those sorts of conversations have been had around some of the more intensive sectors, simply because, moving to more extensive, accepted welfare-friendly systems is easier to identify. But it's been more difficult on the sheep side. Those conversations are being had. The trouble is when you start thinking about some of those outcomes, such as low mortalities, if you pay for outcomes, we work in the sheep sector in particular, I guess, we work very much out there in the natural environment, if you like, and you pay for low mortality. And you've got someone who's lambing outside, and we have, some of the snows that we had a few years ago, and someone that has done everything they possibly could have done right, but because of factors completely outside their control, they have a high level of mortality, and then they're not eligible. It just seems really, really unfair. Or you get an outbreak of Schmallenberg, like so many people did this spring. It just seems so unfair to deal with it in that way. So if anything, the conversation is going more towards things like maybe castration and tailing. If you can, even there we've got to be careful, but for instance, if you're choosing not to castrate or tail, would you be eligible for a welfare payment? But when I say you've got to be careful there, if you choose, for instance, not to castrate, but then you end up with a load of ewe lambs in lamb going to slaughter, there's a perverse outcome, which again, no one wants to see that. So we just got to be very, very careful with this. But there still is the intention, although I would say it's undeveloped at the moment, about whether we could move to some sort of reward for delivering high welfare systems or outcomes.
Now, I remember it's been a lot of conversation early on in the early tested trials, wasn't it, about whether it was going to be outcome based or whether it was going to be about the actions and stuff which they've gone for. And yeah, like you say, it's so open to external influences that it's quite a hard one to push for. Karen, we will go into your question in a little bit more detail in the following slides, so we'll leave that for now. But basically, no, you can't claim for SAM3 on your low input grassland at the moment. They're not ones that are stackable, but we'll go into a bit more detail about it. If anybody's got any more questions for Phil, kind of any questions at all, really, it could be about the art behind him, but I might not ask it. Please do keep putting them on the chat, and we'll
that's
go
a webinar in itself, Tabitha.
And we'll go on to the next slides, but do keep putting your questions in the chat. I'll just share my presentation again. Take a little moment. I'll find my correct slide again as well. So we're going to go on now into a bit of detail about some of the options specific for the sector. Now, these are by all means not the be all and end all for your system. And as we've just mentioned, a lot of the best way to utilise the SFI and all of the schemes that are available now is to look at it as a whole farm, not just by sector, but obviously we wanted to give a little bit of a livestock focus today, so we've tried to link up some of the ones that are relevant. The first one on the list, as Karen's question, is about herbal lays. Kate is going to go talk about these in a little bit more detail in a second. The headline is that it's £382 per hectare, which means this has the highest uptake. So they put out numbers for uptake up until the summer, and this was by far the most popular one because believed to be relatively easy to commit to. Not necessarily been done brilliantly across the board. Partly the must-haves for a herbal lay under this action is 1 grass, 2 legumes and 2 herbs. Not what we would consider a particularly good, diverse bit of ground. The recommended, so they now on all the SFIs, they have what you must achieve and they have what they recommend you aim to achieve. And their recommended is 5 grasses, 4 legumes and 4 herbs. So that's starting to look a little bit better. They've also changed their recommendations on it in terms of best practice for nitrogen application, etc. So there is a few things there, and it's to establish and maintain your herbal ley. Basically, in terms of our, and Kate will give you more detail on this, we're kind of expecting or wanting everybody to do best practice wherever possible and really try and make the most of this within their system, and not just chuck it in for the money. The next one on the list there is legumes on improved grassland. That's £102 per hectare. And it's with the aim to have legumes growing from spring to autumn, and it's all about better nutrient utilization. So that's got a slightly different code there because it's actually about it's under a bracket of nutrient management rather than soil management necessarily. So it's about making sure that you're kind of fixing nitrogen and stuff. The more general one there that's been mentioned is manage grassland with very low nutrient inputs. That is not as nice a payment as the herbal ley one, but it's kind of covered. It's linked up with one of the previous countryside stewardship options, and it's that kind of low input grassland one. A couple of things on it: has to be grazed or cut. You can put FYM on, but no inorganic stuff. And really they're aiming to have a variety of species and a variety of heights in the sward. So ideally cattle grazing, but you can graze it with sheep and things as well, but it does have to be grazed. We've got some supplements there. All of those supplements need to be stacked on top of an appropriate base option. You can find those listed on the website. We'll send a link of that round with the follow-up email if nobody's been on there. You do have to wade through a bit, but they have made a new tool that's slightly easier to use. I've highlighted native breeds there because some of you may be aware that list occasionally changes, and it's all about rare breeds as well, and it's about encouraging numbers of rare or kind of breeds on the rare breeds list. So that did until recently have lings on it. They are no longer there. So hopefully you haven't gone out and bought a herd of lings just to get that payment. It's not a huge supplement, but it does make the kind of, for example, it'll stack on your low input grassland one. It does start making those payments look a little bit better. But it is worth checking that list because there's a few things like Anguses and Herefords, although considered a British breed, it's the original population tends to be smaller animal that is on the list. It's not the kind of most common commercial beast, so it's worth keeping an eye on that. But yeah, so there's a few options there. There's a lot of them where there's a few numbers after the letters. It's because there's different densities basically, so it's about how much you graze or how many animals are on there and stuff.
Tabitha, there's just a question from James in the Q&A about, from his understanding, the SPM2, 3 and SPM4, 5 and GRH11 are not stackable on the SAM3, but are on the low input grassland one, the CLIG3 and the GRH6. Is this correct? Are you aware of this? You are. Good.
Yeah, like I say, we can send a link around to the full list, but yeah, it's more of the low inputty kind of ones, whereas the
uplandy ones.
Yeah. So mostly they do have kind of like the low input lowland one as well that it stacks on, but yeah, the kind of the more productive high input stuff, which herbal lays is considered under, they don't necessarily stack on top of. So you do have to have that base option.
Perfect.
So yes, beef and sorry, I just realized beef and lamb. I've said options and grants. There is basically no grants currently available in terms of the extra grants and stuff. There is, obviously, you can, as mentioned before, have the countryside stewardship capital grants within these systems, but there's just not anything at the moment targeted directly towards beef or sheep. We do think there's potentially, they've talked about beef housing as one coming up, so it's kind of a watch this space, but there's not anything specific at the moment. On to dairy, some of the same ones I put on there, but some more ones that are about kind of nutrient management. There's a precision farming one in there, the variable rate application of nutrients. So that is £27 per hectare, which is not huge, but it's just about using variable rate tech when you're applying your nutrients. So that could be nitrogen in either slurry, farm manure, or inorganic, but it could also be kind of lime or P's and K's, whatever it is that you're applying. It's based on if you're applying a certain amount. See, the details are worth looking up. But if that's something, if you've got crops as well, I would tend to be the way that it kind of pays for you using that on your grassland as well. The legumes I've put on there as well. I've highlighted the nutrient management one, the CNUM one, the assess nutrient management and produce a review and report. That's something that is available for beef and lamb as well. And it's a one-off payment for a report, and it has to be by a FACTS qualified advisor. If you haven't got one of those, then you can find them on the BASIS website. You can tick your boxes to which one what you're looking for, and they have to do that report. And the payment, I think, tends to leave a little bit over, depending on who your advisor is, but you should have a little bit left at the end of that. And then in your annual declaration, you have to say that you've done it and have that available for them to see if they want to see it. Again, it's one of those things that you could just do it like that, get it done and leave it in a drawer. We do recommend that you have that as a kind of practical document that you're using, and take advantage of that opportunity to get the tests done. You can top up you can use it to you can top up to get more tests done, because it does organic matter, but it doesn't necessarily do more. So it's worth having a little look for that. Sorry, just seeing a question in the chat. For herbal ley, is it just for improved grassland? Yes, but the definition of improved grassland is more flexible than it used to be. So it's worth checking your land use codes. So because your BPS payment no longer is based on what's on the RPA website, essentially, so you're just going to get paid the percentage of what you applied for in previous years. So you can now change your land use codes without issue, essentially. So you can go onto your RPA portal. So if those grassland that you regularly cut, regularly apply something to, have done your ditches and your drains and stuff, it can count as improved grassland. So if there's anything that you think that I could have a herbal ley on that, or I've already done stuff to that and I could make it better, then you can change that to improved grassland. What if you have the OT2 supplement? Kate, do you know the answer to, or Adrian even maybe, do you know the answer to that? If you're inorganic, can you can change it to improved grassland, can't you? You're on mute at the moment, Kate. You checking up an answer. We'll follow up with an answer to that in a minute.
Just looking up the answer.
Yeah.
But yeah, give us a second. We'll see if we can come back to you. Yeah.
The other option that I've popped on this slide is about managing intensive grassland adjacent to watercourses. So they don't require a catchment sensitive farming kind of support for that, but actually there is catchment sensitive farming advisors for the whole country now. It used to be about specific catchments, whereas now everybody has access to them. So if there is things that you're worried about on farm, if you think that you're struggling with kind of contamination or pollution, stuff like that, then do speak to those advisors. They are there to help. So it's worth having that conversation with you, and they can support you getting into a few schemes. It's not necessary for the SFI stuff, but actually if you wanted to go into higher tier stuff or for some of the grants, then having the support of that advisor and having already engaged with that advisor will be very helpful. So she's busy looking up a question, but I was going to chuck over to Kate for this next slide.
Thanks, Tabitha. Yeah, I was just looking up about the OT2 supplement. I do kind of recall Adrian and Jerry investigating this, because I think when people went on to do their application, it was causing some sort of block that you weren't able to. But looking up on the DEFRA website now, there's no suggestion why you wouldn't be able to. But let me double check and we'll get back to you.
Yeah, it could be one of those things like I mentioned earlier, that if they and if it's part of the reason they're still just taking expressions of interest rather than having applications fully open, is because the team are having to check a lot of applications manually still because of glitches like this. So things that should be able to happen, but the option's not coming up on the portal automatically. So then they're having to check stuff physically, which is why they're still trying to stagger people and taking it through expressions of interest. So yeah, if there's nothing flat out saying that you can't do it, you should be able to do it, but it's probably not going to be a quick fix through the RPA, unfortunately. Sorry, Kate.
There's also another quick question from James about OT2 stack with click3, CLIG3. Seems strange that pays more than OT2. You don't know about that stacking?
I will look at that while you're doing this slide.
Yeah, nice. I just wanted to have a couple of minutes really on just thinking about these SAM3, these herbal lays, and the fact that obviously there is been huge interest and huge uptake, and just trying to get the balance right between really getting the right outcomes that everybody wants from the herbal lays. I'm a great advocate, and we've been talking about them for quite some time, particularly, you know, in a rotational grazing platform, particularly within an arable rotation. Some of these mixes, you know, have huge benefits. And there has been concern, I know, of people taking up sort of permanent grasslands, which are actually quite valuable and could be managed very nicely to increase diversity, to sow kind of these herbal mixes, which seems such a shame when you could manage those permanent grasslands very well and perhaps just do a bit of stitching in or do some other approaches to increase that diversity, to then still be able to claim, you know, the herbal lay payment, because you can obviously do it on existing permanent diverse grasslands. But I just wanted to focus really a bit on the management. I was at a meeting this morning with a load of sheep farmers talking about herbal lays, and the actual grazing management still is this kind of critical thing to really get the outcomes that we want, because, you know, the more diversity the better, the more different variability in legumes and grasses and herbs that you can get in, the more of those multiple functions that you're going to get, and more of the added benefits, whether that's nutritional, whether that's through the tannins and anthelmintic properties, whether that's through all the additional benefits to soil health. The more diversity, the better. But in order to really maintain and prolong all of that lovely diversity and keep all those species persistent after you've invested in establishing it, whether that was through a new established lay or was through, you know, considerable effort to stitch into an existing permanent pasture, which is not necessarily that easy, it's really trying to think about how you can get a really nice rotational grazing approach into how you're going to manage them going on, both to keep those species persistent, keep that diversity there, to manage weeds by not allowing sort of bare ground coming through, and to really get that forage utilization that you want. And the real focus of that is to not overgraze in order to maintain that diversity, and to really think about how you can focus your grazing quite tight in order to get the best forage utilization, to prevent them grazing down too tight, and to get the, you know, the outcomes in terms of animal performance that a lot of the trials have been demonstrating that you can. I don't know, one study that I was looking at said that you could get 250 grams per day summer lamb growth on a herbal lay compared with 80 to 150 grams on a perennial ryegrass clover lay. So the evidence is there that they can really perform, but you do need to manage them correctly. Just the next slide, Tabitha. So it's just really trying to highlight, if you're not experienced in managing the diverse lays and are really trying to go for them, you know, where you've got this incentive with the SFI payment, which obviously is quite nice and ripe, to think about how you're going to get infrastructure in place, maybe using some of the other boundary grants, maybe using some of the different country stewardship grants that have already been talked about, to try and get fencing in place, to think about whether you're going to do additional tree planting on boundaries, to, you know, to provide all the shade and shelter that Phil had suggested. How are you really going to plan to get that rotational grazing in place, whether there's funding pots you can access to, you know, get water. I know if you're in FIPL areas, there's more scope to get access to fencing and water infrastructure and things. So it's really about trying to plan. So yeah, we have got lots of sort of support and advice out there, both through the Future Farm Resilience Programme, but also through some of our other programmes, in really trying to get the management right when you're going into some of these different options that you maybe have had less experience with. But I think the key thing really is to think about not just sowing new swards, but if you've got existing lays which you know have got a bit of interest in terms of multiple legumes, a few herbs in there, if you start really thinking about longer rest periods and letting that grass grow a bit taller and much longer residuals, you'll probably find that you can actually build some diversity back into that sward quite quickly. Than feel the need to actually sow some new seeds. So yeah, just a bit of a shout out to rotational approaches. Right, next slide. I appreciate we're getting close to time, aren't we? So
Kate, I'll just answer a couple of questions that we
yes.
had. James's question on the Q&A about OT2 stacking with CLIG3. Yes, it does stack. My brain was being a bit slow. So the OT2 is part of Countryside Stewardship as it was originally. So obviously we still have people being, in fact, at home, we're still in HLS on some of the farm, Countryside Stewardship on some of the farm, and therefore haven't really got to the point of looking at SFI. But yes, so if you're in a Countryside Stewardship agreement still, and are in OT2, you can stack the CLIG3 on top of it. That works fine. I think that maybe that covers some of the, so some of the questions just where it kind of overlaps with previous agreements and new agreements. You should be able, if it's really causing a problem and you think you will be in a better situation if you're entirely in a new agreement, they are intending on having a mechanism where you can leave your current Countryside Stewardship agreement as long as you're achieving similar or more environmental benefit with your new agreement. They're saying it's possible. Some people have been in discussions about it and stuff. They don't have an exact mechanism yet. So again, it's just causing these complications that if you were already engaged, it is proving a little bit harder to apply and be in something different. But so there is cases. I've shared a link with James in the comment there, and again we'll share it at the end. All of everything that each option stacks with is available on their Funding for Farms tool now, so you have to go through kind of option by option of what you're looking at, but it does then give you a list further down of everything that it stacks with, including Countryside Stewardship, and very occasionally if it stacks with old HLS, but most things don't because they were whole farm options. So that's, sorry, again, a bit of an expansion on that. If you're still in that, they're encouraging you to either let it run its course or leave it, because they can't, old environmental stewardship, because it was the whole farm and you've not specified kind of which field is doing what, they don't feel like they can make it stack. So a lot of stuff stacks with Countryside Stewardship. There is a few glitches that we've mentioned. But then because they're trying to phase out those old agreements, those old methodologies, to everything being the new one, there's just going to be this period of it being complicated. Kate, we've got another question that I think has come from your bit of chat there, maybe. Thank you for saying that about not ploughing up permanent grassland for herbal lays in order to get the payment. Permanent grassland has so many benefits. It's a real concern that people might plough them up unnecessarily. It's not a question, but a very poignant statement. That yes, we're
really trying to prevent that. And a letter you may have all seen in the press that led by Pasture for Life has gone to DEFRA to think about how they can increase some of the grassland payments to really incentivize, you know, people to improve their existing grasslands and to maintain and manage their existing permanent grasslands, because the risk of the SAM3 option is too much. There's just that question there about the definition of improved and improved and unimproved. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not saying it's not important to them. I'm just saying that it's changed slightly from how it was necessarily. So again, it is available online. We can share it in the follow-up. But yeah, it's just how they kind of defined it has changed slightly.
Sure.
And it is easier for you to change your land use code if it fits into that kind of category.
I think
but
it's
yes,
the fact that so much is historic, isn't it? So if you've changed things, then do look to be able to officially change them, because there's more scope.
If that's what works better for your farm. It's one of those things that you kind of need to look at everything both ways at the moment before making decisions, I think. Right, sorry. Absolutely. We will go on to the slide again, Kate. So this is you still.
Yeah, no, sure. Well, to be honest, I mean, Phil's already touched on it a bit, really. Unfortunately, a lot of these infrastructure grants are currently closed in terms of new applications. You can see if you've already put an application in either for the Slurry infrastructure one or some of the improved farm productivity stuff or the calf health and welfare grants, then you've obviously got some more time into the summer next year to put in your full applications. But we put this detail in the slide a little bit, really, just a bit of a nod to the scope of what has been offered. And I think, as we've mentioned, there's potential, hopefully, for further housing grants. It seems very, very likely there'll be more grants available for things like the Slurry infrastructure, as that's obviously a very hot area. One bit of information I was just going to share, that is, if you have had a successful application to the Farming Equipment and Technology Fund, apparently in order to claim your money back, the claim form is at the bottom of your original agreement email. So just for information, if you have put that in there, in order to find your funds. So yeah, it's a matter of watching this space, and we'll obviously make sure as soon as new grant pots are open, we'll let you know whether that's through the small grant pots or the much bigger ones. Next slide, Tabitha. I think it's just about the hens, isn't it? So yes, obviously there was the new grants available to support verandas and development of laying hen houses, particularly in terms of ventilation and improvements like that. And we can only assume that they will look at other areas for improvement in housing across other species, but possibly going to be less beneficial to many sheep farmers who housing's not such a focus. And as I think Phil already mentioned, it's potentially more likely to focus on perhaps some of the species that are farmed more intensively and improving the welfare situation for them. Right, I think back to you, my love.
Thank you. I was just answering one of the questions in the chat, which was about if having land in higher T stewardship on a SSSI, will you be able to change to an SFI agreement? So you'll definitely be able to at the end of your current agreement, but if you want to change during your agreement, you're probably going to have to wait until the new higher tier options come out, which, like I said earlier, is hopefully after the budget. Just for hitting that equivalent environmental benefit. So it's likely to be a case where it's a bit of a mix. But yeah, so I think if you're currently in higher tier, you'll probably need new higher tier options to change any of that. But it is worth, if it's countryside stewardship higher tier that you're in currently, some of the SFI options will stack, and you can have more than one agreement going at a time. So you could apply for some things now and have them stacked on top of what you're currently in. It's just the HLS, the environmental stewardship HLS, that doesn't stack, basically. And the other question about the dairy grants, as Kate mentioned, those are all currently just for people that have already done the checker online, which was open previously. But as Phil mentioned, doing the review helps lead you into some of those. So if the next round's open, it's worth having the review done, and that will help lead you into some of those. You'll be told about them quicker. But yeah, so currently none of them are available, but watch this space in case any more come up. So actually getting to the end of time, we've got a couple more slides, so I will keep going. By all means, if you need to go, do log off. We will send the full recording round afterwards. I'm normally better on time on this, but I got very distracted by everybody's questions. So we'll keep running through what we're talking about. But yeah, apologies if you do need to leave. We will send the recording round afterwards. You can catch up. So this is the last slide we have about some of the grants and options, and I just wanted to put this one in about boundaries and trees because it kind of felt like it basically encompasses all of the livestock things. Obviously, a lot of them are relevant for arable as well, but as we're thinking about livestock today, so a couple of things on the boundary options, things like that one at the top, the dry stone walls, is actually a really nice option. Obviously, hedge options came out first, but this came out in the summer. And it's pretty easy to do. It's about £27 per 100 metres, but all you have to do for it is take a picture when your bit of wall falls down and take another picture when you put it back up. And as long as that's within 12 months, you'll continue to get the money. So I feel like that is a pretty easy option to be getting on with. I'm up in Northumberland. We have quite a lot of stone walls, so it's quite pleasant from my point of view. The earth banks and stone-faced hedge banks and stuff, very relevant for where Kate is, down in the south, in Devon and Cornwall and things. There's a lot of those combinations and stuff, and there's some really good payments on those as well, so worth having a little look at. The managed hedgerows and hedgerow trees ones have been available since the 2023 SFI options. And again, they're based on the managed hedgerows is either side of the hedge. So you can get you can be paid for both sides. The hedgerow trees is based on a number of trees per 100 metres, I think it is as well. But if you're in a big hedgy place, then that is worth keeping a look at. And there's also ones there for protecting infield trees on intensive grassland. So there's a few options there. Then some of the grants in terms of fencing for boundaries, these are within the Countryside Stewardship capital grants, but you can still get those. A lot of them are linked to environmental benefit or water protection and stuff, but worth looking at if you're wanting to put new fence lines in or need to replace stuff and things. Then it might not pay for the whole job, but if it's something you were planning on doing anyway, then it's nice to get that money off. Agroforestry, we do have a agroforestry specific webinar coming up, so it's worth, that'll be talked about in a lot more detail, but there is a couple of options for agroforestry in terms of how people might picture it with trees planted within the field. We tend to as an organization talk about agroforestry a lot more generally, and that bound hedges and shelter belts and stuff all count as agroforestry as well. But the options specifically in terms of SFI are about infield planting. And there is some decent payments for that. So if it's something that you've considered, I think it's well worth having a plan and getting advice from any number of people. There's ourselves, there's the Forestry Commission have advisors specifically for agroforestry now, and the Woodland Trust have advisors and stuff. So do access that advice, but it is something that you can get decent money for. And within those Countryside Stewardship capital grants, you can get things like tree guards, you can get money for your planting of your trees, and also for a plan, so you can get that paid towards if it's not free advice that you are seeking. Kate, we were going to get you to do this one.
Yeah, well, I think, to be honest, you've covered it largely, haven't you, in terms of sadly, we're still waiting. So in terms of getting more clarity on what these Countryside Stewardship higher tier options are, as repeatedly at a recent webinar that we'll just hear soon, and I think I understand it, they have to inform you at least 2 months in advance of being able to apply for it. So yeah, we're obviously running out of months a bit for things to happen this year. But anyway, so obviously as soon as we hear anything or we have more details, we'll be able to provide those. And we have a webinar coming up in December, early December, so we can only hope that when we get to that one that we will have those details. I just wanted to mention a little bit just for a second around the fairer labelling consultation, because I know we were talking a little earlier about sort of options for higher welfare systems and what sort of payment by results payments might look like. And it's very likely that if any of those sorts of options do occur, it'll be for things like intact tails in pigs, or moving to slower growing breeds in chickens. But one of the things that could potentially be helpful for some of our sort of higher welfare lamb and beef systems is if they do go for higher welfare labelling approach through method of production labelling going forward, or at least include the GB labelling approach. And the outcome of that consultation, again, is supposed to be coming soon. So just an interesting thing to look out for as part of that wider health and welfare pathway in trying to grow the market for higher welfare. The labelling approach was sort of a key driver for that. Right, where are we next?
So next steps, as we've mentioned, and as obviously hopefully a lot of you will be aware of, we're delivering this as part of the DEFRA Future Farm Resilience Fund, which does close in March, but basically the visits and everything have to be done by the end of the year. So if you're wanting support for this and you haven't accessed it through anybody else previously, you can get one-to-one advice from the advisors within the team. So that's really specific down to your farm. As I mentioned earlier, we're trying to be very practical about it and how we can encompass everything into your farming business, and how this can support you doing what you're wanting to do with it. So please do kind of get in touch with us about that. We'll send a follow-up email and stuff, and your SBI number will be checked and things. But if you've got anything specific and want some help, then we are here to help. And that can include that. I'll probably start with a phone call, but it can be, or emails, but it can come up to a farm visit if needed. But that is kind of, we're starting to look fairly limited on time for that. So do take the opportunity if you're interested.
Yes, indeed. Do take the opportunity, because yeah, we really will have to wind things up by the end of the year. But just to highlight, obviously, we have a whole team of advisors within the farming and land use team, not only the lovely Tabitha and a little dabble by myself, but all sorts of different people who focus on in different areas, whether that's through horticultural advice or agroforestry, or more focus on soils. And we have a farm woodland advisor as well. So if there's a really specific area that you want some attention on, then do get in touch using that email address. And I know we'll follow up after the webinar this evening with more details, because yeah, hopefully we would be able to find someone who could help and has that technical skills. And yeah, we've got 2 more webinars left in our program of all the work we'll be delivering. I put the link in for the agroforestry and hedge trees cover, or hedges and trees collection that's on the 20th of November. So do join that one. And as I say, we've got another one which Jerry Elford will be leading on the 4th of December, which will be sort of our final attempt to update everybody on what's going on. And we can only hope that we'll have some more details of this, this higher tier countryside stewardship by then. So yeah, join us for our last 2 sessions. And just a little, just a little nod really, because obviously the Future Farm Resilience Programme is all about business, but it's all about looking after all of you, all of the farmers as well. So there is support out there. It is a really stressful time, so much change, so many pressures going on. So do, talk to your friends and family, talk to us, talk to any of these organisations if you are finding things really difficult. But do please, take action if things are becoming too difficult.
And thank you, basically. So I'm going to stop sharing so that you can see us again for a last couple of minutes. So thank you all for attending this evening and for your questions. If there's any that we haven't answered or you didn't get a chance to put to us, please do pop them in the chat or send them to us afterwards. And like I said, we will send a follow-up email, and I'll try and include all the links I've said I will include, and we will also send the recording and the slides. So if there was anything in there that you want to check back on, then that'll be available. And thank you very much, Phil, for joining us. It's been really,
thank you very
really
much,
helpful.
Phil. Yeah, thanks everyone.
It's a pleasure. It's been my pleasure. So thank you. Nice to spend the evening with you.
There is a little survey in the chat. If
Yes.
you have got just a couple of minutes for our little survey, we would be most appreciative, just to see if, make sure we're being helpful, basically. But thank you ever so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
I'll close the meeting.